I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad news, but if your research into energy healing or chakra science has involved looking at fat, modern reference books like this, or even worse, tip-tapping away on Instagram for hashtag chakra healing, hashtag energy work, or any kind of Reiki meme on your smartphone, you're not necessarily wasting your time. A book like this by Cindy Dale is, it's a fat book of lots of information. But I'm going to call your attention to the quality of that information, because in my opinion, chakra science peaked in 1987. And it's not just my opinion, although I did technically have the opinion before it got confirmed later on with this magical book. Not necessarily magical, it's actually very well researched academic insight into the development of the Western Chakra System from the initial translations of Eastern texts in the early 1900s, at least in the mainstream sense, and then a little bit before that in the obscure esoteric 1880s theosophical circles with Blavatsky and Charles Leadbeater and Annie Besant and then Rudolf Steiner coming later. If all of these names sound unfamiliar, I wouldn't be too surprised. We have lost a memory of our roots. I studied history back in university, and for me, following the thread of an idea or trying to unravel a concept that we take to be ancient wisdom and really theory testing it is such an incredible process. The first time that I read this book, I was shocked, completely shocked to believe that the ancient chakra system, the 7 colors and the different endocrine associations or different healing associations only came through in 1977. Not in the full form, of course, it had been developing for hundreds of years earlier, but you can just look at some of these images from the initial texts which were published in the 1880s, and they look very different from what we're used to seeing. The chakras aren't in their regular alignment. In fact, some of the clairvoyant, mystical, insight into the subtle bodies really revealed some different interpretations of how the chakras might look. And this is the point that I want to try and make before we go into the main inner work essential of this video. If you don't test what is taken to be true, if you don't properly research behind the scenes of what is apparently already behind the scenes information, you can be sent through a spiral of low-grade, source amnesia-esque repeat and regurgitation of information which just isn't true, especially when it comes to esoteric topics and especially when it comes to YouTube, Instagram, or any social media representation of ancient wisdom. So where does this leave us? Well, it leaves us with arguably the best book on chakra healing, both according to my opinion and according to the strict and rigorous research of Kurt Leland, who himself is an astral traveler with over, 3 decades of experience. He's got some fascinating books. What's that book? Well, if you know your chakras and if you know your subtle science, you won't be surprised that I'm going to hold up Hands of Light by Barbara Brennan. Barbara Brennan has a master's in atmospheric physics. She worked at NASA as a research scientist, and then progressively, as her healing impetus awoke inside of her, she took on training in bioenergetics, and progressively, by her account, unlocked her clairvoyant capacity and channeling capacity and all of these other mystical skills. Why is this book the peak of chakra research? Well, it's not only because we go far beyond the 7 chakra system to look at the 7 different bodies. We have the astral body or the etheric body. These are normally terms which are used interchangeably in a lazy sense in modern conversation around the chakra system. But with this book, Barbara Brennan goes back to the theosophical roots and then also a little bit earlier, as well as her common, or not common, but her interpretation of common interpretations of different chakras, plus her first-hand experiencing as an energy worker, to really illustrate that the 7 chakra system is just not true. Sure, there might be 7 rough chakras that we still have, from the root to the crown, but there's also a front, there's a back, and by Barbara Brennan's estimate, if we're truly going to be accurate, we have to take into account the etheric body and the emotional body and the 7 different bodies and how the 7 different chakras operate at each independent level. And that's not all. I'm going to briefly give praise to this book that came out in 1987 just to try and tickle your fancy and encourage you to read this book. It's it's interesting. Sometimes I have clients who ask me about the chakras, and it used to be more of a central theme in my work. These days, I'm not so interested in this kind of chakra-based understanding of the world. It's an interesting archetypal or symbolic way of looking at our healing journey. Perhaps someone's got a problem with their throat, and we say it's a 5th chakra issue. But for me, it's very background, in the same way that astrology or any kind of typology is background compared to the foreground trauma healing work and daily grounded actionable change. This is potentially risky territory for disembodied individuals who like heady concepts and abstract theories which make them feel very special and magical. I honor that, but we can also have roots. And yet nonetheless, the area of research in this book that I find most interesting is actually when it comes to the combination between bioenergetics, which is roughly a science or a theory of how energy moves through the body and gets trapped or distorted via trauma, and the knowledge of clairvoyant auric defense. Look at this beautiful page. I've written all over it when I first read this book a few years ago, but we've got an example of all of the different types of self-defense that people might go through, including splaying their energy outwards, trying to hook people in, and this makes so much sense on an everyday level for anyone that sees this, because you can already see, hopefully on the camera, what your defenses might be. I think I've indicated some of my old defenses and some of my present defenses myself. It's very visually striking. It goes beyond the chakra awareness to look at the auric or etheric bodies as a whole and how we interface with the world around us. Sure, I could give plenty of examples of how specific defenses work, and I might do this in future videos. I already touched upon it in some of the bioenergetics videos from earlier in this series. But for the sake of this video, I merely want to draw your attention to the fact that this, without a doubt, is the best single source energy healing book that exists. It has not been topped. Kurt Leland, in his research, which I think this was published in 2016, he came to the same conclusion. And this guy is 40 years older than me with 3 decades of astral travel experience, while also being an academic researcher. Just don't waste your time. I know that if you're interested in these topics, it feels very good to go for the basic associations. It feels wonderful the first time we learn about the chakras to read a book like Anatomy of the Spirit by Caroline Myss, or some other mainstream feel-good chakra book. But if you really want to honor your transpersonal development, something that we've been talking about in this series, if you really want to develop at that higher band of clairvoyant or intuitive perception without getting spiritually grandiose, then turn to a real master. I have incredibly beautiful friends who practice Reiki, as I think some of them their full-time job and some of them as part-time work, and they're really doing this hands-on healing as their thing. That's not something that I do. And even if that's not something that you want to do, if you don't want to be a hands-on healer, if it doesn't call to you, you want to be maybe more grounded, or you're an artist who's just interested in these ideas, it doesn't harm to read the best possible iteration of these ideas, because you can start with a book like Hands of Light. And when I share it with one-to-one clients, I remember one client that I was working with this time last summer, and he asked me, what's the best book on the chakras? I gave him this book, and for the next few sessions he was making his way through it as we were focusing on other things, and he was overcome with joy at just how dense and yet how accessible the material was. Again, the front side of the chakras and the back side of the chakras, and how the chakras work in different ways at different levels of our being. And even if you want to take it with a skeptical approach, you can just see a chakra as an archetypal representation of how energy works in a certain part of our body. The fifth chakra, the throat chakra, Vishuddha, that is an archetypal representation of what it means to divinely create, and there's higher and lower expressions. You get what I'm saying? Go for the highest quality resource, because source amnesia is a major plague when it comes to intellectual rigor. And I suppose as Instagram and YouTube get more and more popular with these kinds of topics, people aren't only not holding up books, but they're also spinning these concepts in a way that is very marketable. And if you don't realize that this is happening, you will fall hook, line, and sinker for whatever chakra-related diagnosis might be coming in, and you're on the end of the hook, and it's not just your money and your time that's taken. You actually might be led down the wrong path, or even go into a spiritual delusional fantasy space where you place more emphasis on subtle energy symptoms or systems than your actual everyday grounded experience and basic things like health, fitness, and good lifestyle habits. I'm kind of a boring esoteric teacher in that sense, because I'm not primarily an esoteric teacher. I'm interested in full spectrum integral consciousness, a la Ken Wilber or any other developmental theorist. For those higher bands, you need higher level information. I'm giving you the best possible resource to get started. It's full of illustrations, full of different diagrams and ways to work with the chakras for anyone who may want to go down that path. But if you just have a casual interest and you've seen some videos like this before, stop watching these videos and go to the books. And once you've read this book, you can go straight on to the next episode in this series, which is actually the top tier of esoteric goodness, and that is Theosophy. Esoteric Theosophy, not the first generation with Blavatsky, not the second generation with Annie Besant, but moving into the third generation, some would argue second generation, with Alice Bailey and her wonderful study on practical meditation and practical maturation of consciousness from intellect to intuition. One of the top books in my library in regards to all of these topics. If this is what I'm saying is the top tier of inner work when it comes to chakra healing, that's like middle school compared to this being college level. If you want to learn more about this book and some of the key ideas in this book, you know what to do. Next video, Inner Work Essentials. I'll see you over there, and we're going to use meditation for the good of yourself and the good of the world around you.